And I would like to welcome you to our conversation today. If you're able to turn your cameras on, we'd love to see you. If not, we understand that you may be doing something else in the background. But I'm very excited to talk about this process a little bit because all of you may have these ideas and opportunities too. Anne, wave Anne, in Hopkins was doing a project that she thought might be of benefit to others in our MASA organization. So she reached out and connected me with folks that she worked with and like, oh my gosh, this sounds really good. And others might be willing to or interested in learning from it. So fast forward a month and here we are to talk about it. So welcome to everyone. And Anne, if you would take it away.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see familiar faces. Hi, Matt, and names. Yeah, I'm really excited to share with you some of the work that my team and I engaged with Dave and Patty on last year, starting kind of around this time, maybe a little earlier. Dave has a presentation, and so I think, Dave, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then we can kind of kick it off.
Right. Here we are. Oh, we somehow got to the end of it rather than the start. Here we are. So thank you, Anne, and thank you, Lori, and thanks very much to the folks at MASA for giving us this opportunity to meet with you and share with you the work that we did with Hopkins. And to what we want to do is basically Abby and Patty and I are going to kind of present you some overview of what we did for about quickly, like 20 minutes or so, because we'd rather have a discussion and hear questions from you guys than us just doing a long presentation on details. The four of us, I'm Dave MacCallum. I am the MacCallum part of MacCallum Ross. I have a background as an academic in computer science and logic. I left academia and actually worked as a consultant in financial services for a number of years. And then I started up a consulting partnership with my partner, Patty Ross. Patty, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm the, excuse me, I'm the other half of that name there, MacCallum Ross. And my background is in educational psychology. I have a degree in quantitative methodologies, evaluation primarily. And together we've Dave and I have been working with a lot of not-for-profits, so that includes nonprofits, but also educational institutions over the last 15 years doing sort of similar and related work. So I'll turn it over to Anne.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Ertl. I've been the Director of Innovation, Design, and Learning here in Hopkins. Gosh, I think this is my 6th year. My background is as an EL teacher. That's where my heart still lies. And Abby, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I have been an assistant director of the Innovation, Design, and Learning Department for Hopkins, and also the data scientist for Hopkins. And so my background is actually in psychology, and specifically mental and health psychology. And so I have joined Hopkins about 4 years ago and have been really excited to work and contribute to their work in data. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dave.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think that, so we were asked by Anne and her colleagues to come in and think about how to do a academic return on investment for the various programs that Hopkins has. And do you want to say something about, in particular, the motivation for doing this project for you guys?
Yep, sure. So like all of us, we definitely knew that we needed to make some budget reductions and, primarily reduce in areas that would not have a direct impact on our classrooms. And so we saw a need last fall really to start thinking about a way to do this. I mean, we all know program review to some extent. That's a common thing for us to work on in the education field. But what we also sort of were interested in is, you know, we've been making investments across the system in a whole bunch of things, whether it's we are an IB district, so we make investments in training our staff in IB, AVID, but also, you know, a lot of investments around some of the materials, digital and analog materials that we were using. And so we knew that we wanted to start looking at outcomes for some of these investments in an organized way. So we can, you know, we can look at student data, we can look at teacher usage data, but we wanted to pair that information with how much we spent on the thing to try to see what is going to be the biggest bang for our buck, and what is a sort of formulaic way to look at that. Because again, like I said, we've done program review, but we hadn't necessarily done that paid attention to the fiscal aspect of it. Abby, is there anything you would add?
No, you covered it great.
And, you know, Patty, maybe you can, I don't know if you want to add something about this point of doing a program audit.
Well, I think that the way that, you know, it went for Hopkins was there was this budgetary concern, but I also think that just in general, you might want to consider, a district might want to consider just that aspect that I think became apparent in the work with Hopkins is like, we've been adding programs and we have so many programs that we would just like to be able to, even if we didn't have to cut anything, sit down and look at what kind of return we're getting, what kind of academic return we're getting on this. So while it's an appreciation of the budgetary constraints that most of you are under or are feeling, it's also just a good preventive medicine, if you will, being able to have the program audit in place so that if in the future there are questions, there are problems, budgetary problems, you're prepared to answer those.
Or even if there aren't problems, you just want to make strategic choices based upon a change in your goals. Yep, absolutely. So one of the things that we wanted to briefly talk to you folks about is our approach to doing this academic return on investment versus the way that you might typically find it from other firms. And we're not saying that what the other firms are doing is mistaken. It's just probably not going to be helpful for the kinds of goals, the kinds of things that Hopkins was trying to achieve. So if you look and see if someone comes in and does an academic return on investment, what they typically focus on is a particular program. You have a reading program, a math program, something or other that you're trying to do. You're trying to build social, emotional, you know, skills or whatever it happens to be. But it's very focused on that one program and looking what you get from it. Our approach was to, and because this is what was needed by Hopkins, was to look at multiple programs at once, not just one at a time. And if you do the typical program assessment, you generally have to go and require all kinds of new data. You got to collect the data, define what it is, and so on. We realized that the only way that Hopkins was going to make the progress that they wanted to make is base our analysis on existing data that Hopkins has and existing expertise that Hopkins staff has, staff and teachers. The typical program assessment work isn't really built in such a way that you can situate it in the context of whatever particular goals the district has. It's a kind of standalone thing for the program, not for the goals of the district. We specifically built our approach so that the goals of a given district, and you can define, I mean, they're up to you to define what they are for the analysis, really provide the context for determining this academic return that you get for your fiscal investment in these programs. These other approaches typically do not look at indirect financial costs. So that's not just the cost you pay for leasing the program or buying it outright, but the costs associated with facilities, with staff, with all those other things. We have built in a way of looking at indirect costs because they're important. Typically what happens is someone comes in, does the assessment, and gives you the results. Here you go. Here's your academic return for your reading program. Instead, what we do throughout the whole thing, and it was actually the fun part of the project, was actually working with the district staff for them to build the expertise so that when we're done, they know how to do this. I mean, it's theirs, and they can do it in future instances, or figure out how to use this kind of approach in other ways. And the bottom thing is, it's been implicit in what's been said before. If you do a single program assessment for its academic return, there isn't any way that you can, let's say you did 10 of them, there's no principled way of comparing the outcome of those 10 different assessments so that you could figure out, like in some, Anne said at the beginning, in a formulaic sort of way, how do you compare the different programs? But that's really what Hopkins needed to do, and oftentimes what different districts need to do. So that's the difference between the approach that we developed with Hopkins. But by the way, I want to emphasize, we didn't come into this project with all the stuff in blue and like, this is what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. In fact, we came in and Hopkins had a problem, and we said, okay, here's what we work with them to develop this approach. So this is something that was very much came out of Hopkins needs and Hopkins collaboration. Let me just move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to Patty here.
Yeah, thanks. I think, Dave, you've covered this. I'm sort of repeating a little bit, but the idea of being utilization focused, some of you might be familiar with this concept of utilization focused, comes out of evaluation work, where you're actually engaging the user of the evaluation from beginning to end in the process, so that what gets produced is something not just with the end user in mind, but with the end user. And so the upper continuum there is just a sort of graphical to indicate, that first time that we're engaged with you, we're doing that work together. And the goal of it is that we turn over something to you at the end of that process, which allows you to then go on using it over and over again, not just for decision making, but being able to refine and improve that model yourselves. And so it's really focused on the user's needs and the kinds of decisions that need to be made. And it's tailored to those two things.
Okay. So the process of working with us is, although we have an approach and a model, which we can share with you later on if you want during discussion, it's still going to be, if we work with any of you folks, very much bespoke. Okay, so if you take the tailoring notion of getting a bespoke suit, you go in and you get measured, they have a bunch of cloth, you choose the cloth, and they make you a suit. This is what this is going to be like. This is not buying an off-the-rack suit. So we first meet to define the goals of your project. Like, what are you trying to do? Including who's the team that's involved? How do we communicate? Define what counts as a program and identify the materials needed. And maybe Abby, because you raised this in our preparation for this meeting as an important point, this third one about defining what counts as a program. I don't know if you have something more you'd like to say about that.
Yeah. So when we first started, I think one of the strengths of our process is that we brought in a lot of different people in a lot of different positions. And so in some cases, there were the program directors. And so there were people with a lot of investment in the room. And what we really wrestled with at first is, what is a program? Is a program AP? Is a program IB? Is it IXL, which we pay for our math instruction? Like what is a program? What's not a program? And I think that this was a really important effort for us to, or exercise for us to go through, because it made us really get precise around what we wanted to focus on and what mattered for us, right? And so a program could be very small, it could be very large, but I would say that was probably at least 50% of our conversation before we even started playing with the model. And it was strategic and a good way for us to just get our hands wrapped around this in a way that didn't just immediately start touching on FTE and different money that was going towards things that were really near and dear to people.
And Abby, my memory of this process is that part of what was happening in this going back and forth and figuring out what to work on at first was that there was a sense in which Hopkins was overwhelmed by how many programs there were and also the variety of them. They seemed very disparate. This kind of thing is really different than that kind of thing, and so on and so on. There's a huge number, and like you said, there's all these stakeholders that are invested in various ways. Like, how do we even start to get our heads around this, right? And what we ended up doing is selecting a subset of the programs, roughly speaking, the things you pay for, right? You know, to an outside firm or organization, right? Where Hopkins people could start thinking about how to do AROI in this way, right? And that subset was the digital subscriptions that we worked on. And it turned out to be a good place to start for Hopkins. And that yielded I think, two important things, you know, a way to reduce some of the budget in a way that you wanted to, but also a way to start building confidence in the staff that you could look at other kinds of programs in a sort of more in this kind of more structured way. You're nodding in a friendly way, but I want to make sure that I'm remembering this properly.
Yep, you are. So what happened was, I mean, I think Dave and Abby put it nicely, but we were actually really hung up on what is a program and what is not a program. That took us a while. And so what we did, and Dave and Patty just kept like assuring us, well, you know, we'll test it on the model and see, we'll just see what happens. And so our initial go, I think we chose 6 different things. We chose language immersion, IB, IXL, I can't remember the others. And so exactly what they predicted would happen is what happened. We saw right away that we were getting good data on the return on investment specific to our digital portfolio. And probably like many of you post-COVID, like our digital portfolio was out of control, like massive, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. And everybody was hitting the paywall and, you know, requesting all of these different new tools. And so that seemed to us like the right way to go. It was almost felt kind of like the lowest hanging fruit, and the area that we could see really clearly would be a good area of reduction for us. So our target was to reduce our digital portfolio by about 250,000, and we actually got close to 300,000.
Excellent. And I think that what Anne mentioned, and I'll just amplify a little bit, is that the way that we worked with them is to, first of all, like pick just a few programs, right? To get used to using the analysis, using the model, thinking about how to do analysis in this sort of way, because I would venture to say it's a way of doing analysis and comparison that is not baked into your typical secondary education kind of, or, education view of the world. I mean, education people are very, very refined and careful about measuring things, right? And that's wonderful, except that you never have time to do that measurement for 250 programs and in a way that would.
We lost
Sorry,
you,
that was
Dave.
my bad. Yeah, I went and gestured the earbud out of my ear. So, all right. Yeah, so basically what we did is let's take a few programs, build the model around them, see how it works, and then move on to a set of programs where you wanted to, as we're calling here, the set of target programs, look at the outputs, review the final outputs. And another thing I want to mention here a bit is think about the implications for your project goals and how you're going to use this in communications and decision-making with your key stakeholders. Whether it's the school board, parents, teachers, all the groups the staff, the groups that you would think of. So Patty, unless you think there's something else on this page we should mention, I'll just move on. It's good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
So just in summary, I think the highlights of what we've been saying here is that what you get at the end of this process from working with us is not just that you're involved in the process, but you develop expertise in actually doing this kind of work and using this model. So it's a very hands-on interactive process. At the end of it, this model is yours. And you can reuse it, modify it, refine it, however you need to. You also have access to us in order to support that use of that model, should that become necessary. And finally, that your staff has some way, Dave, I'm just sort of repeating what Dave finished by saying earlier, of communicating with key stakeholders, right? So it's a process that leads you to have a way of saying why one program is better than another, why the decisions that you're making are justified. And if not making those decisions, at least having those difficult conversations with people. And I think that's it.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we can have a discussion and answer questions here. As I mentioned before, I do have a version of the model that I can pull up and show people if they want in conversation or in response to a particular question. But maybe I'll just open it up now if anybody has any questions or comments that they would like to make. Someone would like to see a sample of the model. All right, I figured that would
There's
happen.
down in the chat, there are people.
Yep, and they please show the model is what they're saying. All right. So here is the model. This is a kind of slightly de-identified version of what we did with Hopkins. I'll run through it like really quickly, but people should ask questions about it as we're going through. What we decided is that what you need to do is let's say we've got 30 programs or so, and let's call them B. I just label them A through AA here. And you've then got a bunch of goals that your district has. Here, Hopkins identified 4 academic goals and 3 technical and other goals that they're trying to achieve. So one of the key parts of the model is if you have a given program, let's pick row, let's say, I don't know, here, row E here. Row E, what it does is there's these numbers along the row are just some initial estimation of how much this given program E contributes to a particular goal. And what Hopkins assessed is that program E contributed at 2, which means a medium level, to these 4 academic goals. this, and this. It contributed only in a low level to this technical and other goal, but a high level to this technical and other goal, and a low level here, right? And so the basic idea here is that if you're looking at your academic return, you have to define what it is. What is it you're trying to get? And your goals for your particular district are the way of determining what it is that you're trying to achieve in your goals, okay? So that's the first thing. If you move on here, you can see, all right, well, how much does a program cost? In fact, E was free, so there is no free in the sense that there is no direct cost for it. But we did assess a kind of non-fiscal costs, and we worked with Hopkins to estimate whether basically the average cost, we just put it in as $10 as a way of scaling things. And some programs down here, like this one, were a bit lower. Some of them were higher and all that, but it's just a way of including the notion of non-fiscal costs, right? So it's costs beyond what you pay for buying it or renting it. Then we went on and looked, okay, so how many kids are actually, pardon me, Patty?
Yep. Yeah, that's
how many kids are in the program? And so in the case of E, there was 100 kids in the program. So the non-fiscal cost is basically ends up scaling to 1,000. The total program cost is 1,000. And then you end up, basically what you're doing is, okay, given the cost of a program and the number of kids in it, what is your return that you're getting? Now, not surprisingly, because this analysis is an academic return on investment. So what you're trying to see is how much value you're trying to get from a program per dollar spent. Well, since you're spending so little for these top programs, they end up having a very high AROI, right? So this green column is your actual academic return per dollar spent. Per student, it's really like per student per dollar spent, right? And this set of columns here that I just walked through, these are the actual students involved. Well, Hopkins said, well, we also have an idea that we paid for a whole bunch of students who aren't involved. So what happens if they all enrolled? What would change? This was less interesting for these programs at the top, because basically the spreadsheet has now been sorted in terms of this column, which is your, this is the AROI. What's your academic return per dollar per student? But what about ones like down here, where you're paying quite a bit of money for the program and you're not getting a lot of return? But what happens if all the students that we paid for were actually using the program, right? So that's the difference between this set of columns and this one. And here's an interesting thing. So let me look over here. This is the third from the bottom of the programs. There's currently not very many students in it, right? Only like 100, but they paid for 8,000 of them, right? So if they were to get all 8,000 students in it, then they'd have a very high AROI. But here's another one where they're only getting 350 students, but even if they got almost 9,000 that they were paying for, the AROI is still pretty low, 324. And as you can see, the median AROI is 1285 and the mean is 895. So that's a really low AROI, this particular program. And of course, it's because it's really expensive. It was a really expensive program that was yielding very little. And this is, I believe, exactly the sort of analysis that Hopkins needed in order to be able to make the decision. I'll just show you a couple other things, and then we'll, these are a bunch of columns that basically do some sub-calculations. Behind all of this is a bunch of formulas that we can share with people how this is done. One thing I want to say again, because I went over it very quickly, is that this column with the indirect costs or the non-fiscal costs, this is really a high-level estimate. And the approach to doing this analysis is start with a high-level estimate that's easy to get. And some things may pop out as clearly excellent or terrible based on that high-level estimate. And you don't need to refine it more, but you can always refine your estimate of expenses and other bits of data in order to give you the confidence that you're making an informed decision. So maybe I'll stop at this point and see if there are questions, and I'm happy to go back to the spreadsheet, of course. Actually, let me just say one thing. I mentioned at the top that I used to be an academic, right? And I was in computer science, and I left and I went to work for a big consulting firm. And after about 2 weeks, one of the partners pulled me aside and said, MacCallum, listen, there's a difference between academic research and the research that we do, right? We are not trying to produce here knowledge that's eternal, right? That's not the goal here. What we're trying to produce is research that will help decision makers make decisions under uncertainty in an informed kind of way, right? And so that's what the research has to be targeted to. And that's what this analysis is for. It's how do you make a decision about these programs with the data and the expertise that you have that really gives you confidence that, together we understand that these programs are really giving us something great for the amount we're spending on them. And these programs are really quite problematic, right? And it will allow you to be comfortable in that decision, but also to communicate it to your stakeholders that you've done the analysis, you've got a rationale behind it, right? It's not just arbitrary or, it's not just arbitrary.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add that I think speaks a little bit, but not completely, to the question in the chat is the beautiful thing about this from the data perspective is we weren't putting out a survey. How much do you like IXL? How much do you like BrainPop? Any of that? We already had the data. We had the number of users. We had the cost of the program. We could see how many users were actually using it. So putting this spreadsheet together took a matter of days or a couple of meetings rather than like a whole data collection endeavor, which Dave and Patty talked about at the top. So
yeah,
that was
in terms of the question specifically about staff time. Yes, we thought about, how much PD time, for example, might be needed in order to continue increase the use or at least maintain the use of the particular digital tool. Not really, because we ended up focusing on digital tools, it didn't really have any type of facilities implications, but that could also be considered when you are looking at the non-fiscal costs.
There's a really good question about when giving a score for each goal area, was there some sort of general rubric used to award a score? How did they determine the actual score for each goal area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that we did was based on the goal areas, we knew who the best folks might be to answer those questions. So one of the things that we looked at was technical automaticity, right? We didn't want a digital tool that required hours and hours and hours of work on the back end. We only rated it as a 1 in terms of importance to us, but it was something we cared enough about to look at. And so for that particular goal area, we had our tech team take a look at all of the tools and use their expertise to say, yeah, this one takes a ton of our time, so we're going to give it a 3, whereas these others are less so, and so they would be ranked a little bit lower. And we followed a similar process with the others as well. So for example, we have a learning framework in Hopkins, and so as we looked at each of the tools, we kind of thought we rated it against the different components of our learning framework.
Good. There's another question with comment in the chat with a series of questions. How long did the process take to complete at Hopkins? Well, we sort of talked about that a little bit, and Abby kind of gave the answer, right? I mean, it took a long time to figure out what programs to look at, and what were going to be the ones of interest. Once they were figured out, it was actually pretty quick to do it, because collecting the data and running the model is fairly quick, and a matter of, I don't know, a couple of 2 or 3 weeks, you know, meetings and things like that. It's really defining how to use it. What is the initial cost to do this a first time? And you were the client, you can speak to that if you want.
Well, I think what you said earlier about the difference between this and academic research is really was true for us too. It did take us a long time to sort of wrap our heads around what was going to be the utility of the tool that we were creating, and we knew that if nothing else, like it would give us a more specific area of research. Like I said, we were able to look at 30 different digital tools. And for us, at least, I think because those tools were discrete enough, we didn't need to do further research. The model by itself gave us some pretty clear direction about things that we could eliminate. I do think that, and somebody else was asking, where else might you use this? Well, we're certainly going to bake this into any program or standards adoption process that we do in the future. But the next things that we're sort of looking at, we've invested really heavily in our district in IB and AP. And so we're going to start looking at some of those types of programs next, which is going to, we're starting to think about what the redesign of the model might need to look like to address those kinds of things. So we probably would take out things like, technical automaticity and replace that with some other sort of points that we would want to measure against.
The cost of for Hopkins of engaging us was on the order of 1/10 of what they saved.
And I would add that I think the majority of Dave and Patty's time was, I mean, I guess I don't know for sure, but a lot of time that I really appreciated was spent facilitating a conversation with our team. Because like I said, there were program directors in the room that were like, are you axing my program? Is this what we're doing right now? And so it was a lot of like building trust and collaboratively coming together and saying, well, I don't know, what do we think the goals should be? What's most important to us? What do we think we should consider in those indirect costs? What are considered in the direct costs? So it wasn't like something where, 3 leaders go into a room and then produce this model and say, here are the results. Like, I think the strength and the investment was in really facilitating a collaborative conversation with the people involved so that it built trust in the district. And we really didn't get a lot of pushback against tools. It was, hey, we can tell you what we did. We had lots of people involved, and this is what we yielded, and we adjusted based on people's feedback. So, and then I think it was just even more strong than to go to the board and say that, okay, we're starting another thing. Do we know if this is working? Like, how can we speak to this? And so being able to bring that to the board and to people that were, really looking at learning from this critical eye, it was, I think, really important and meaningful.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I think that's right. And that does reflect Patty and I's experience. I mean, that from our side, that we spent most of our time working with you guys and facilitating, the actual design of the modeling, collecting the data, doing the analysis and stuff like that was a small portion of the work that we did. That was the you know, for a statistician and computer scientist, that was the part that we did in our pajamas at home, and that was the easier and quicker bit. There was a good question about a technical question. Yes, we are using a weighted outcome index to determine the ROI, and it's flexible. It's built into the model that you can change the weightings in any kind of ways that's appropriate for a particular district and the way that you want to do it. And we can certainly refine the model. Is simple enough in its structure and in the formulas that it uses that it can, as I said at one point, this is entirely bespoke. You know, there's a sort of conceptual approach that we believe is going to be helpful for districts, but we're willing to tweak it, refine it, or rebuild it as needed. And I actually look forward to doing that. That would be the fun part. You know, Abby said some very nice things about working with us now and did as well. It was great working with Hopkins because they were completely out of their comfort zone early in the, right? Is that fair to say, guys? You know, completely like, I mean, not technically, but it's just sort of like as a decision-making process, it was a new way of doing things. And it was great working with them and being their partners. You know, they were the internal partners working with all of their colleagues and their stakeholders. And the four of us would think about how to get this done. And it was very gratifying that it turned out as well as it did for you guys. It was, that's always really fun for us.
I wanted to say one more thing. I think it's also important for us to be transparent that this wasn't the only thing we used to decide. So when we were talking about, you know, what goes into a program, and people would say, well, what if, but like I have plenty of people that would say really great things about my program. What does that matter? Does that count? And this was just one tool. It wasn't the deciding factor. It was one contributor to our overall decision. And that really put people at ease. And I think that's what I would recommend. And that's certainly what we'll do in the future. Is it's not going to be the only thing that makes the decision.
Question, did you include also things like number of devices and material things as well when looking or deciding costs? Not explicitly, but could easily be added if it's going to be the kind of thing that's going to be material to making a decision, right? I mean, these are really great questions, and the answer is always, if there's a good expert opinion that including anything as data is really going to change the answer, right? Then let's put it in and see how it does, right? And then we can do, and then now I'll go to my financial services geeky hat thing. We can do a sensitivity analysis, right, on the model, right? What that means basically for people who don't know this is, you know, how you have an outcome or a recommendation based on the model. How sensitive is that recommendation due to changes in the data? If this goes up a little bit, does it change a lot? If it goes down a little bit, or, you know, it doesn't really matter. You can get the data approximately right, and you always get the same outcome, right? So that would be an outcome that's insensitive to small changes in data, which is what you want in a thing like this. So we can do, refinements and sensitivity analysis to help build confidence that you don't need more refined data in order to make an informed decision, or more refined data as part of your decision-making process, to echo what Abby just said, right? Because this is just one tool that you're using in a very complex and nuanced decision that you have to make at a district.
The only thing I would add to what Dave was just saying is one of the other concerns that we had was around like fidelity of implementation on the digital tool. Because we knew that maybe a tool could be really great and we maybe just hadn't done a great implementation of it. And so we built that in to our model as well, so that it would account for potential versus just, you know, what we were seeing.
Yep. Sorry, just a sec. There's a question about costs again that's come up. What's the startup cost your company charges? In other words, how much, not counting district staff time, will this cost the school board to do this? They always ask this. You know, it's nobody ever answers this question directly, do they? They try to hedge all the time. It's so I'm just going to tell them. And is it okay that I tell them what? Yeah. Hopkins paid us $25,000 to do this work. And that seems to us, depending upon, you know, the size of the district, the number of programs, the number of staff that are involved, all those kinds of factors, something around that would probably be the thing that would make sense for us to be able to replicate this with other people, you know. So it's, yeah, something like that. I hope that's helpful. There's a question about when you did the review of IXL, did you consider who did not use the tool?
We did a little bit. So when we were able to contribute additional quantitative analyses to the model, like for example, we did do a set of analyses on, do we see better math outcomes for high Excel users versus low IXL users? And so we took that into consideration when we had the data. And a lot of times we did, but sometimes we didn't. So yes, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm in St. Cloud. One of the things we're considering is outcome-based evaluations with our vendors as we get involved with vendors to really look at, you know, what's their skin in the game, if you will, if we really want to see improved outcomes. But it requires us to be able to do a really rigorous analysis of whether or not we had, you know, people not using it, people using it. So I was just curious if in all that digital portfolio, you're looking at utilization, if you looked at dosage as well. And I get we're not going to get anything, you know, causal, but we would be able to put together, I think, some sort of a matrix of correlation to improved outcomes. I'm wondering if you did that analysis.
And you're nodding.
We did. And we did keep IXL at least for one more year. And no, I'm not being facetious. We did choose to keep IXL. And I think the other thing I guess I would say is, you know, things like we also have Lexia in our district. So these really big ticket things. For those items, Donna, we would definitely are doing more analysis than we are for, say, you know, something that has a much smaller level of use. And I know Abby did a lot of that work specific to IXL actually over the last year or so. We'll continue to do more of that, especially with the ones that we are, you know, frankly, paying for every single K-8 student in our whole system, right? Let's see, we have so many too, and we cut a bunch of them, and we probably still have more work to do in that area. There's just a ton of them.
You know, Donna, I had a thought, if I understood what you were saying correctly. It would be very interesting to adapt this model as a tool that you would use with incoming potential vendors. And part of the reason is when you engage them, you can also then think about defining what kind of data you need to collect from them and ask them to produce so that you can do the analysis you need to do. Yeah. So you can sort of, because we had to retrospectively collect the data on programs based upon existing data. And I keep on saying this, expertise, because a lot of this is judgment of particular area expertise within Hopkins. That's still going to be part of it, right? You're still going to need that. But if you can kind of predefine some data from vendors, that would be an interesting iterative use of the model as well. Yep.
Melissa, I just looked, and IXL was the median for the student value per dollar. So clear as to whether it was actually where it fell in the spectrum.
Oh, okay. Great. Any other impact of student learning, growth versus grade level? I would say, Bill, in answer to your question, if you have student learning as growth as one goal, and growth versus grade level, however you define that as a goal, as an academic goal, you would then collect the data needed to determine that, right? And or make the assessment about how well it's doing against those goals. It would then go into the model explicitly, right? Moreover, you'd be able to say, well, how important is student learning? So you may build into the model that student learning is like, and we can change the scale, like is 10 times more important than technical facilitation, right? And you can make that dominate, right? And technical stuff be far less important. So all of that can be adapted to whatever you take your goals to be and how important they are to you as you use the model. I hope that helps.
Right. And then you just assign what the metric is that you're going to use to determine that. So if you're going to look at, I don't know, fall to spring map data or FastBridge data or whatever it is. So if growth is the thing that we want to emphasize in a particular area, then you just have to figure out what is going to be the data set you use to give that tool a ranking in terms of growth.
Great.
All right.
Yep.
Well, we
Thanks,
thank everyone for the robust chat conversation, the questions. It's always nice to see what you're thinking in response, and just a big shout of appreciation to Hopkins for sharing what you're doing, particularly when you find it valuable in decision making. We know that budgets and outcomes for kids are things that we're all really focused on. So thanks for that. And thanks to Dave and Patty for sharing their process. Dave has put an evaluation in the chat, so we'd love your feedback and look forward to future learning together.
Right.
Thanks for
And
coming.
I will share that PowerPoint with Dave Christians, and he'll make it available to all of you as well.
That would be great. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Terrific.
everybody.
Thanks so much.